The blood on her hands had long since dried, but Ruby Porter could still feel the weight of every life she had tried to save pressing down on her shoulders as she stumbled out of the makeshift hospital tent into the harsh afternoon sun of Colorado City, Colorado Territory, in the spring of 1878. The smallpox epidemic had swept through the mining town like wildfire through dry brush, and for 3 weeks straight, Ruby had barely slept more than a few hours at a time. Her back ached from bending over cots, her fingers were raw from scrubbing with lye soap, and her eyes burned from the combination of exhaustion and the acrid smell of carbolic acid that seemed permanently lodged in her nostrils. She was 24 years old and felt ancient. Ruby had come west from Philadelphia 2 years earlier, one of the few trained nurses willing to venture into the rough territories where proper medical care was desperately needed. She had imagined adventure, purpose, and the satisfaction of making a real difference. What she had not imagined was the relentless tide of suffering that seemed to have no end, or the way her own body would eventually betray her with its weakness. The main street of Colorado City stretched before her, a dusty ribbon lined with wooden buildings that still smelled of fresh pine. The town had sprung up around the gold strikes in the nearby mountains, and it retained that rough, unfinished quality of a place where people were too busy chasing fortune to worry about refinement. Ruby leaned against the post outside the tent, trying to steady herself as the world tilted dangerously. She had not eaten since yesterday morning, or was it the morning before that? Time had become elastic and strange during the epidemic. She knew she should go to the boarding house where she rented a small room, knew she should force herself to eat something and sleep. But the thought of walking even those few blocks seemed insurmountable. "Madam," the voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and concerned. "Madam, are you all right?" Ruby turned her head slowly, the movement requiring more effort than it should. A man stood a few feet away, holding the reins of a dusty brown horse. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn cotton shirt. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray-blue, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "I am fine," she said automatically, though her voice sounded thin and unconvincing even to her own ears. The man's expression suggested he did not believe her for a moment. He tied his horse to the hitching post with quick, efficient movements and took a step closer. Ruby noticed he moved with a horseman's grace, all economy and purpose. "With respect, madam, you do not look fine. You look like you are about to fall over." Ruby wanted to argue, wanted to assert that she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself, but the words would not come. Instead, to her horror, she felt her knees begin to buckle. The ground rushed up toward her, but before she could hit the dusty street, strong arms caught her. The cowboy swept her up as easily as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest. Ruby knew she should protest, should demand to be put down, but her body had apparently decided it was done taking orders from her exhausted mind. Her head lolled against his shoulder and she caught the scent of leather, horse, and something clean like sage. "Where is your room?" he asked, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. "Boarding house," she managed to say. "Mrs. Henderson's, 2 blocks east." "I know it," he said, and started walking. Through the haze of her exhaustion, Ruby was dimly aware of the curious stares they attracted as the cowboy carried her down the street. In any other circumstance, she would have been mortified. An unmarried woman being carried through town by a strange man. It was the sort of thing that would set tongues wagging for weeks, but she could not muster the energy to care. Mrs. Henderson met them at the door of the boarding house, her round face creased with worry. "Lord have mercy, is that Miss Porter? What happened?" She collapsed outside the hospital tent, the cowboy said. "She needs rest and food if I am any judge." "Working herself to death, that is what she has been doing," Mrs. Henderson said, ushering them inside. 3 weeks, she has barely left those sick people. I have been so worried. Bring her up to her room, it is the second door on the right. The cowboy carried Ruby up the narrow stairs as if she were made of glass. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the street. He laid her down gently on the quilt her mother had sent from Philadelphia, and Ruby felt tears prick her eyes at the sudden comfort of being horizontal. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am sorry for the trouble." "No trouble," he said, and she noticed he was already pulling off her boots with careful, impersonal efficiency. "Mrs. Henderson, does she have a nightgown?" "I will get it," the landlady said, bustling to the small trunk at the foot of the bed. "Young man, you should step out while I help her change." The cowboy nodded and moved toward the door but paused in the threshold. "I will be downstairs," he said, looking at Ruby. "I want to make sure she eats something before I leave." Mrs. Henderson helped Ruby out of her blood-stained dress and into a soft cotton nightgown. The simple act of being in clean clothes felt like a luxury beyond measure. Then the landlady propped her up with pillows and disappeared downstairs, returning a few minutes later with a tray bearing a bowl of beef broth, fresh bread, and hot tea. "That cowboy is heating water for a bath," Mrs. Henderson said. "Says you will rest better once you are properly clean." "He is right about that, I expect." "Who is he?" Ruby asked, suddenly realizing she had been carried through town by a complete stranger. "That is Riley Winters," Mrs. Henderson said, spooning broth toward Ruby's mouth like she was a child. "Works at the Double R Ranch north of town. Good man, from what I hear. Keeps to himself mostly, but folks speak well of him." Ruby obediently swallowed the broth, which was rich and salty and seemed to spread warmth through her entire body. She had not realized how cold she was, how much her body had been running on nothing but will for days now. By the time Mrs. Henderson had coaxed half the broth and most of the bread into her, Riley Winters returned, lugging a large tin tub. He set it down in the middle of the small room and made several more trips with buckets of steaming water, his face carefully averted as if to preserve her modesty, even though she was fully covered by both nightgown and blankets. "There you are," he said when the tub was full. "Mrs. Henderson, do you need anything else?" "We will manage fine," the landlady said. "But you have my thanks, Mr. Winters. Not many men would show such kindness to a stranger." Riley shook his head. "She has been nursing half the town through the smallpox. Least anyone can do is make sure she is taken care of too." He turned to Ruby, and those storm cloud eyes held hers for a long moment. "You rest now, madam. Let someone else shoulder the burden for a while." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the stairs, leaving Ruby staring at the closed door with a strange ache in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Mrs. Henderson helped her into the bath, and Ruby nearly wept at the sensation of hot water sluicing away days of grime and death. She scrubbed herself pink, washing her dark hair twice until it squeaked under her fingers. By the time she was clean and dry and back in her nightgown, she could barely keep her eyes open. She slept for 16 hours straight, a heavy, dreamless sleep that her body desperately needed. When she finally woke, it was morning again and sunlight was streaming through her window. For the first time in weeks, she felt almost human. A soft knock came at her door. "Miss Porter, are you awake?" Mrs. Henderson called. "Yes, come in." The landlady entered with a breakfast tray and a smile. "You have some color back in your cheeks. That is a relief. I was half afraid you would sleep for days." Ruby accepted the tray gratefully and discovered she was ravenous. As she ate scrambled eggs and bacon, Mrs. Henderson fussed around the room, tidying up. "That Mr. Winters came by this morning asking after you," the landlady said casually, though Ruby noticed she was watching her reaction carefully. "Wanted to make sure you were all right." "That was kind of him," Ruby said, keeping her voice neutral even as something warm unfurled in her chest. "I should thank him properly. I was not very coherent yesterday." "Day before yesterday," Mrs. Henderson corrected. "Like I said, you slept a good long while." "And yes, I think a proper thank you would be appropriate." He seemed genuinely concerned. Ruby finished her breakfast and dressed carefully in one of her better dresses, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes. She pinned up her freshly washed hair and studied herself in the small mirror above the washstand. She still looked tired, shadows lingering beneath her eyes, but she was no longer the walking ghost who had collapsed on the street. She needed to check on the hospital tent, needed to make sure Dr. Bryant was managing all right without her, but first she wanted to find Riley Winters and properly express her gratitude. Mrs. Henderson told her that he usually came to town on Tuesdays for supplies, and today was Tuesday. Ruby walked to the general store, enjoying the simple pleasure of moving through the world without feeling like she might fall over at any moment. The store was busy with ranchers and miners stocking up, and she spotted Riley immediately. He was taller than most of the other men, standing at the counter with a list in his hand. She approached quietly, suddenly feeling nervous. In the light of day, with her mind clear, she was acutely aware that this man had seen her at her absolute worst. He had carried her, undressed her boots, drawn her bath. There was an intimacy to that which made her cheeks warm. "Mr. Winters," she said softly. He turned, and his face lit up with what looked like genuine relief when he saw her. "Miss Porter, you are looking much better." "Thanks to you," she said. "I wanted to properly thank you for your kindness the other day. I'm afraid I was not very gracious at the time." "You were exhausted," he said simply. "No thanks necessary. I am just glad to see you on your feet." They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Ruby noticed that his eyes were even more striking in the daylight, and that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow that gave his face character. "Can I buy you lunch?" she blurted out, then immediately felt foolish. Unmarried women did not ask men to lunch, especially not in a town like Colorado City where everyone watched everyone else's business. But Riley did not seem shocked. Instead, he smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed his whole face. "I would like that very much, Miss Porter. But only if you let me pay. You have been working yourself to the bone for this town. Least I can do is buy you a meal." They went to the small restaurant next to the hotel, a humble establishment with checkered tablecloths and good, simple food. Ruby ordered chicken and dumplings, and Riley got a steak. As they waited for their food, they talked. She learned that Riley was 26 years old and had been working at the Double R Ranch for 3 years. Before that, he had drifted through various territories, working cattle drives and ranch jobs, never quite finding a place that felt like home. "What brought you to Colorado City?" Ruby asked. Riley was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I guess I was looking for something more than just work. A place to put down roots, maybe. My parents died when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I have been on my own since I was 17, and after a while, all that drifting gets lonely." Ruby felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. "I am sorry about your parents. That must have been terrible." "It was a long time ago," he said, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "What about you? What made a trained nurse from Philadelphia come all the way out here?" Ruby sighed, considering her answer. "Adventure, I suppose, and purpose. In Philadelphia, I was working in a hospital where there were a dozen other nurses who could do what I did. Out here, I am needed. Really needed. It is hard and often heartbreaking, but it matters. The whole town knows it matters, Riley said seriously. You know how many people you have saved these past weeks? My boss, Mr. Carlson, his youngest daughter had the smallpox. Doctors said she probably would not make it. But you sat with her for 2 days straight, never left her side, and she pulled through. He cried when he told me about it. Ruby felt tears prick her eyes. I just did what any nurse would do. No, Riley said firmly. You did what an exceptional nurse with a good heart would do. There is a difference. Their food arrived and they ate and talked more. Riley told her about life on the ranch, about the satisfaction of working with horses and cattle, the beauty of watching the sun rise over the mountains. Ruby told him about her training in Philadelphia, about her family who thought she was crazy for coming west, about the small triumphs and large heartbreaks of frontier nursing. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of days. Ruby found herself laughing for the first time in weeks, genuinely laughing at a story Riley told about a particularly stubborn bull and a broken fence. When the meal was over, Riley insisted on walking her back to the boarding house. They took the long way, strolling through the streets of Colorado City as if they had all the time in the world. I should check on the hospital tent, Ruby said reluctantly as they reached Mrs. Henderson's front porch. Make sure Dr. Bryant has not been overwhelmed. You just got back on your feet, Riley protested. Should you not rest a bit longer? I have rested, Ruby said, and there is still work to be done. Riley looked at her for a long moment, something complicated crossing his face. You take care of everyone else, he said quietly. But who takes care of you? The question struck something deep inside her, some lonely place she usually kept carefully guarded. I manage, she said, but her voice was not quite steady. Let me care for you now, Riley said, and the words were soft but intense. Not just once. I want to make sure you are eating, resting, not working yourself into the ground again. Would you let me do that? Ruby stared at him, surprised by the surge of emotion his words provoked. She had been on her own for so long, had prided herself on her independence and strength. The idea of letting someone else shoulder even a small part of her burden felt both terrifying and deeply appealing. Why? She asked. Why would you want to do that? Riley smiled that slow smile again. Because from the moment I saw you trying to stay on your feet through sheer stubborn will, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Because you are the kind of person who gives everything to help others and forgets to save anything for herself. Because I would like the chance to get to know you better if you will let me. Ruby felt her heart beating fast in her chest. She should say no. She should protect herself, maintain her professional distance. She had work to do, a calling to fulfill. She did not have time for romance or courtship or whatever this was. But when she looked into Riley's storm cloud eyes, all her carefully reasoned objections seemed to dissolve like sugar in hot tea. All right, she said softly. Yes, I would like that. The smile that broke across Riley's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then I will see you tomorrow. I could bring lunch to the hospital tent around noon. I would like that very much. Ruby did go to the hospital tent that afternoon, but the crisis had passed. The epidemic was waning, and Dr. Bryant assured her that he and the other volunteer nurses could manage for a few days while she continued to recover her strength. You nearly killed yourself, Miss Porter, the elderly doctor said sternly. I cannot afford to lose my best nurse to exhaustion. Take the rest of the week off. That is a medical order. So Ruby found herself with something she had not had in months, time. Time to walk through town and actually look at the mountains rising in the distance. Time to sit on the porch of the boarding house and read a book. Time to think about gray-blue eyes and a gentle smile. True to his word, Riley came by the next day with a picnic basket. Since Ruby was not at the hospital tent, he found her at the boarding house, and they walked to a small park at the edge of town where someone had planted cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. They sat on a blanket and ate cold chicken and biscuits, and Riley told her about his morning, about a new foal that had been born at the ranch. Ruby found herself fascinated by the details of his life, so different from her own. "You miss Philadelphia?" Riley asked as they watched clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. "Sometimes," Ruby admitted. "I miss my family, my mother especially, but I do not miss the life I had there. I was living in a room not much bigger than a closet, working at a hospital where the head physician thought women were too delicate to handle difficult cases. Out here, nobody questions whether I can do my job. They are just grateful I am willing to do it." "The town is lucky to have you," Riley said. "I am lucky to have met you." Ruby turned to look at him, at the sincerity in his face. "I am lucky too," she said softly. "I did not expect when I came west to meet someone like you." "Someone like me?" Riley's mouth quirked up at one corner. "What does that mean?" "Someone kind," Ruby said. "Someone who sees when people are struggling and actually does something about it. Someone who makes me feel like maybe it is all right to not be strong every single moment of every day." Riley reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "You do not always have to be strong, Ruby. Not with me." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her shiver despite the warm afternoon. "Riley," she said, testing his name in return. "I am glad you were there that day. I am glad you caught me when I fell." "I will always catch you," he said, and though the words should have sounded dramatic or overblown, they did not. They sounded like a simple statement of fact, a promise he intended to keep. They saw each other every day after that. Riley would ride into town after his morning work was done, and they would spend the afternoons together. Sometimes they walked through the countryside surrounding Colorado City, and Riley taught her the names of plants she had never seen before. Sometimes they sat in the shade and talked for hours. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence, reading or watching the world go by. Ruby felt herself opening up in ways she had not expected. She told Riley about the patients she had lost, about the guilt she sometimes felt that she could not save everyone. She told him about her fears that she was not good enough, skilled enough, strong enough for the work she had taken on. Riley listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to fix her or tell her she was wrong to feel what she felt. He just held her hand and let her speak, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. In return, Riley shared parts of himself that she suspected he rarely showed anyone. He told her about the loneliness of his life, about how he had convinced himself he was content with solitude because it was easier than risking connection. He told her about his dreams of maybe having his own small ranch someday, a place where he could build something lasting. "I want a home," he said one afternoon as they sat by a creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. "A real home with people I love in it. I have been drifting for so long, but lately I have been thinking about what it would be like to stay in one place, to belong somewhere." "You could have that," Ruby said. "You are hardworking and skilled. If you saved your money, you could buy land." "It is not just about the land," Riley said, turning to look at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It is about having someone to share it with." What good is a home if you are alone in it? Ruby's heart was pounding. She knew what he was really saying, knew that they were circling around something significant. They had known each other for only 2 weeks, but it felt like longer. It felt like she had known him forever, or like she had been waiting to meet him her whole life. "I have been alone for a long time too," she said quietly. I told myself I did not need anyone, that my work was enough, but I was lying to myself. Riley reached out and cupped her face gently in his hand, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I am falling in love with you, Ruby Porter," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot deny what I feel. You are the bravest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I want to spend every day showing you how much you mean to me." Ruby felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I think I started falling the moment you caught me." Riley leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Ruby did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted the promise of something beautiful and real. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, a kiss full of tenderness and restrained passion. They kissed by the creek as the afternoon sun painted the sky gold, and Ruby felt like she was finally, truly home. But loving Riley did not mean Ruby gave up her calling. She returned to work at the hospital tent the following week, though she was more careful now about taking breaks and not pushing herself to the point of collapse. Riley made sure she ate lunch every day, showing up like clockwork with food from the restaurant or sandwiches Mrs. Henderson had packed. The other nurses and Dr. Bryant noticed, of course, and there was good-natured teasing about Ruby's handsome cowboy. But there was also approval. The whole town, it seemed, had heard about how Riley had caught her when she fell, and the general consensus was that they made a good pair. Summer rolled into Colorado City with hot, dry days and cool nights. The smallpox epidemic had finally run its course, leaving behind grief, but also gratitude. The town held a celebration to honor the medical personnel who had worked so tirelessly, and Ruby was embarrassed by how many people came up to thank her personally, some with tears in their eyes. Riley attended the celebration, standing at the back of the crowd, but his eyes never left her. When the speeches and testimonials were finally over, he made his way through the crowd to her side. "I am so proud of you," he said, taking her hand. "You saved this town." "I just did my job," Ruby protested, but she was smiling. "You did more than that," Riley insisted. "You gave everything you had and then somehow found more to give. You are extraordinary, Ruby." She squeezed his hand, feeling a surge of love so strong it almost hurt. "Take me away from here," she said impulsively. "I love these people, but I need some quiet, just you and me." Riley's eyes lit up. "I know just the place." He borrowed a wagon from the livery stable, and they drove out of town as the sun was setting, heading north toward the mountains. Ruby leaned against Riley's shoulder, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally begin to drain away. They drove for about an hour, climbing into the foothills until Riley pulled the wagon to a stop in a meadow full of wildflowers. The view was breathtaking, the whole valley spread out below them like a patchwork quilt, with Colorado City, a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. "This is my favorite place," Riley said softly. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. I wanted to share it with you." Ruby climbed down from the wagon and walked into the meadow, the flowers brushing against her skirts. The air smelled like pine and earth and growing things. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Riley spread a blanket on the ground and they sat together, watching the light fade and the stars emerge one by one. Ruby nestled against his side, his arm warm and solid around her shoulders. "I have been thinking," Riley said after a long, comfortable silence, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." Ruby's heart began to beat faster. "What have you been thinking?" "I have been saving money for 3 years now," Riley said, "almost every penny I have earned. There is a piece of land for sale, about 100 acres just west of here, It has good water, good grazing, a stand of timber. It would be perfect for a small ranch." "That sounds wonderful," Ruby said. "You should buy it." "I want to," Riley said, "but not just for me." "Ruby, I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards. I know there are probably things we should talk about, plans we should make. But I also know that I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of this. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want that land to be ours, not just mine." Ruby sat up, turning to face him fully. In the starlight, she could just make out his features, the serious set of his mouth, the hope and fear mingled in his eyes. "Ruby Porter," Riley said, taking both her hands in his. "Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who promises to love you and support you and make sure you never have to face the hard things alone again?" Ruby felt like her heart might burst right out of her chest. "Yes," she said, and then louder. "Yes, Riley. Yes, I will marry you." Riley let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they both collapsed in a laughing, dizzy heap on the blanket. Then he was kissing her, and Ruby kissed him back with all the love and passion she had been holding in check. They lay under the stars for hours, making plans and dreams. Riley wanted to buy the land immediately and start building a small house. Ruby worried about her work, about the people who needed her medical skills. "I would never ask you to give up nursing," Riley assured her. "I know it is part of who you are, but maybe you could work a little less, take on a partner, have some help. You could see patients at our ranch make house calls. There are a lot of ranching families out in these hills who would be grateful for a skilled nurse nearby." Ruby considered this. It was true that the town was growing, and there were now 2 other trained nurses besides herself. She would not be abandoning anyone if she transitioned to a different kind of practice. "I think that could work," she said slowly. "I want a life with you, Riley. I want to build something together. And I want children someday, a family. But I also need to use my skills to help people. If we can find a way to balance both, then I think we could be very happy." "We will figure it out together," Riley promised. "That is what marriage is, right? Figuring out life together." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Colorado City. Ruby wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Henderson helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Riley had picked that morning. Riley wore a new suit that he was clearly uncomfortable in, but he looked so handsome that Ruby felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting at the altar. Dr. Bryant walked her down the aisle, and half the town crammed into the church to witness their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Riley kissed her with such tender joy that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Colorado City, in the nicest room available, which still was not very fancy but felt like a palace to Ruby. Riley was gentle and patient, and if there was awkwardness in their first joining, there was also love and laughter, and the beginning of a physical intimacy that would deepen over the years. The next morning, they rode out to the land Riley had purchased. The deed was in both their names now, Ruby Winters alongside Riley Winters. It felt official and real and thrilling. The land was beautiful, a mix of meadow and forest with a creek running through it. There was already a small, rough cabin on the property, built by the previous owner, and while it needed work, it was habitable. "It is not much right now," Riley said, looking almost apologetic as they stood in the cabin's single room. "But I will build you a proper house, Ruby. With separate rooms and a real kitchen and everything you need." Ruby kissed him. "It is perfect," she said. "It is ours, and that makes it perfect." They spent the next few months settling in. Riley continued working at the Double R Ranch to bring in steady money, while also putting every spare moment into improving their own property. He built a barn and a chicken coop, fenced pasture, and started work on additions to the cabin. Ruby divided her time between establishing her nursing practice in the surrounding ranching community and making their cabin into a home. She sewed curtains, planted a vegetable garden, and learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove that came with the cabin. Word spread quickly that there was a trained nurse living at the Winters place, and Ruby found herself busier than ever. She delivered babies, set broken bones, treated fevers and infections. She charged what people could afford, which sometimes meant payment in eggs or vegetables or a side of beef, but she did not mind. This was the work she was meant to do. Riley was true to his word about supporting her calling. When she had to leave in the middle of the night to help with a difficult birth, he never complained. When she came home exhausted and covered in blood, he heated water for her bath and made sure she ate. He was her partner in every sense of the word, and Ruby fell more in love with him every day. Their first winter together was hard. Snow came early and heavy to the Colorado mountains, and there were days when they were snowed in completely. But the cabin was snug, and they had laid in plenty of supplies. Riley spent the long winter evenings working on his leather craft, making bridles and saddles to sell, while Ruby knitted and read medical journals she had ordered from back east. They talked about everything during those long winter nights. Riley told her more about his childhood, about his parents who had been homesteaders in Kansas, about the fever that had taken them when he was just 17. Ruby talked about her family in Philadelphia, about her father who was a banker and her mother who ran the household with military precision, about her two younger brothers who thought their older sister was crazy for wanting to be a nurse. "You think they will ever visit?" Riley asked one night as they lay in bed, the wind howling outside. "I do not know," Ruby admitted. "My mother writes regularly, but I can tell she is disappointed in my choices. She wanted me to marry a banker or a lawyer, someone respectable. A cowboy rancher in Colorado Territory is not what she had in mind for me." Riley was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Marrying me, coming out here?" Ruby rolled over to face him, cupping his cheek in her hand. "I have never regretted a single moment with you," she said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known, Riley Winters, and I am proud to be your wife. If my mother cannot see that, it is her loss." Riley kissed her palm. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," he promised. Spring came eventually, as it always does, and with it came new life. Riley bought 6 head of cattle from a rancher who was moving back east, the start of their own herd. Ruby discovered she was pregnant in April, a discovery that filled them both with equal parts joy and terror. "I am going to be a father," Riley kept saying, wonder in his voice. "I am going to be a father." Ruby was more practical in her concerns. She had delivered dozens of babies and knew all the things that could go wrong. But she also knew that she was healthy and strong, and that Riley would move mountains to make sure she had the best care possible. Dr. Bryant came out to the ranch once a month to check on her, and he assured both of them that Ruby was progressing normally. "You are going to be fine," he told them. "And you are going to have a healthy baby. Try not to worry so much." Riley did worry, though. As Ruby's belly grew round, he became almost comically protective. He did not want her lifting anything heavy, riding horses, or working too hard. Ruby found it both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she told him after he refused to let her help with the evening milking. "Women have been doing farm work while pregnant since the beginning of time." "Other women are not my wife," Riley said stubbornly. "I cannot risk something happening to you or the baby." Ruby sighed, but secretly, she was touched by his devotion. And as her pregnancy advanced into the hot summer months, she was grateful for his help. Her back ached constantly, and her feet swelled, and there were days when she felt like she was carrying a boulder instead of a baby. She continued her nursing work, though she had to turn away some of the more difficult cases as she grew larger. The ranching families were understanding, and several of the women who had benefited from Ruby's care during their own pregnancies came by regularly to check on her and bring food. The baby came in October, on a crisp autumn morning when the aspen trees were blazing gold against the blue sky. Ruby's labor started just before dawn, and Riley immediately rode for Dr. Bryant while Ruby tried to stay calm and remember everything she had learned about childbirth. Dr. Bryant arrived within the hour, and Mrs. Henderson came with him, having insisted that Ruby needed an experienced woman with her. The labor was long and hard, lasting well into the afternoon, but when Ruby finally heard the thin, angry wail of her newborn son, she felt like every moment of pain had been worth it. "You have a boy," Dr. Bryant said, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on her chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Riley came in then, his face pale and anxious until he saw Ruby holding their son. Then he was beside them, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the tiny life they had created. "He is perfect," Riley whispered. "Ruby, he is perfect." They named him James, after Riley's father, and Thomas for his middle name, after Ruby's father. Little James Winters had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray-blue eyes, and from the very beginning, it was clear he had inherited his mother's stubborn streak. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming, and filled with more love than Ruby had known it was possible to feel. She had thought she understood love when she married Riley, but watching him with their son, seeing the tenderness with which he held the tiny boy, made her fall in love with him all over again. Riley was a devoted father. He walked the floor with James when the baby had colic, changed diapers without complaint, and sang off key lullabies that somehow always made James stop crying. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving little horses and cattle into the wood. Ruby had to significantly reduce her nursing work during those first months, but the community was understanding. And when James was about 6 months old and Ruby felt ready to take on patients again, several of the ranching wives offered to help with childcare, creating an informal network of support that allowed Ruby to continue her calling. The years passed with the comfortable rhythm of ranch life. Riley slowly built up their herd, and the ranch began to turn a steady profit. He built the additions to the cabin that he had promised, creating a real bedroom for them and a small nursery for James, with plans for more rooms as their family grew, and their family did grow. Ruby gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah 3 years after James was born, and then another son, Michael, 2 years after that. Each pregnancy was hard, each birth a trial, but each child was a blessing that filled their home with noise and laughter and chaos. Riley proved to be as patient and loving with their daughters and younger son as he had been with James. He taught them all to ride as soon as they could sit a horse, to care for animals, to respect the land. Ruby taught them to read and write and do their numbers, determined that her children would have education even out here on the frontier. She continued her nursing work throughout it all, though it was a constant balancing act. There were times when she was called away in the middle of the night and had to leave Riley with 3 crying children. There were times when she missed important moments because she was helping someone else through a crisis. But Riley never complained, never made her feel guilty for answering her calling. "You are saving lives," he would tell her. "Our children are lucky to have a mother who shows them what it means to serve others." Colorado City grew over the years, gradually transforming from a rough mining camp into a proper town. A school was built, and a real hospital to replace the tent that Ruby had worked in during those early days. More doctors arrived, more nurses, and Ruby was able to be more selective about the cases she took on. By the time James was 10, Sarah was 7, and Michael was 5. The Winters Ranch was one of the most respected small ranches in the area. They had a herd of nearly 100 head of cattle, a dozen horses, and enough land to support them all comfortably. Riley had built a proper house, not large but solid and well-made, with separate bedrooms for the children and a kitchen that was Ruby's pride and joy. Life was good. Not easy, because ranch life was never easy but good. Ruby and Riley had built something real together, a life filled with love and purpose and hard work. They still talked late into the night the way they had when they were first married, still found reasons to steal kisses when the children were not looking, still looked at each other across the dinner table and marveled at what they had created together. Ruby's parents finally visited when James was 12, making the long journey west with a combination of curiosity and trepidation. Ruby had been nervous about seeing her mother again after so many years, worried about being judged and found wanting. But when her mother stepped off the train in Colorado City, and Ruby saw how she had aged, saw the silver in her hair and the lines around her eyes, all her anxiety melted away. She hugged her mother tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender water. "Let me see you," her mother said, holding Ruby at arm's length. "My goodness, you look so healthy, so strong." Her father was equally warm, shaking Riley's hand with genuine respect and ruffling James's hair with grandfatherly affection. They stayed for 2 weeks, and Ruby watched as they gradually relaxed, as they began to see not the rough frontier life they had imagined, but a real home filled with love. Her mother was particularly impressed by the nursing practice Ruby had built. "You have done something remarkable here," she told Ruby one afternoon as they sat on the porch shelling peas while the children played in the yard. "I will admit, when you first told us you were going west, I thought you were throwing your life away, but I was wrong. You have built something important, helped so many people. I am proud of you, Ruby." Those words meant more to Ruby than she had expected. She had not realized how much she still craved her mother's approval until she received it. When her parents left, they promised to visit again, and Ruby believed they would. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, had been bridged. The children grew, as children do. James became a serious, responsible boy who loved working with his father and the cattle. Sarah was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything from the stars in the sky to how the human body worked. Michael was the wild one, always getting into scrapes and adventures, giving his parents gray hairs with his daring. Ruby taught Sarah about nursing, letting her help with simple cases, and was gratified to see her daughter's genuine interest in healing. "Maybe we will work together someday," Ruby told her when Sarah was 14 and already showing real aptitude. "I would like that," Sarah said shyly. "I want to help people like you do, Mama." James, at 17, was already talking about expanding the ranch, about buying more land and building up the herd even further. He had Riley's steady, calm temperament and Ruby's determination, and both parents knew he would do well. Michael, at 15, was still trying to figure out what he wanted. He loved the ranch but also dreamed of seeing more of the world. "Maybe I will go east for school," he said one night at dinner. "Learn about business or law." Riley and Ruby exchanged glances. The idea of their youngest son leaving was hard, but they also knew that each child had to find their own path. "Whatever you decide, we will support you," Riley told him. "As long as you work hard and stay true to yourself, you can do anything." Ruby reached across the table and took Riley's hand, feeling the familiar calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. They had been married for nearly 20 years now, and he was still the first person she looked for in any room, the person she wanted to share every small triumph and difficulty with. That night, after the children were in bed, they sat on their porch swing and watched the stars come out, just as they had done countless times over the years. "Did you ever imagine this?" Ruby asked. "Back when you caught me from falling in the street, did you imagine we would end up here?" Riley was quiet for a moment, his arm around her shoulders. "I hoped," he said finally. "From that very first moment I looked at you and hoped. You were so fierce, so determined to keep going even when your body was giving out. I thought if I could just get to know you, if you would just give me a chance, maybe we could have something special." "We do have something special," Ruby said. "We have everything." Riley kissed her temple. "You are still the bravest, kindest person I know," he murmured. "And I still fall in love with you more every single day." Ruby turned to kiss him properly, this man who had caught her when she fell and had been catching her ever since. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "Thank you for taking care of me all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. Always," Riley promised. "Always and forever." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but also deep satisfaction. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Riley began to slow down, his joints stiffening with age. Sarah went to Denver to study nursing formally, then returned to Colorado City to work at the hospital, though she still helped her mother with cases in the ranching community. Michael did go east to school, studying business in Philadelphia, and living with Ruby's parents, who doted on their grandson. But he came home every summer, and eventually he returned permanently, helping James with the business side of the ranch and starting a cattle brokerage business that served the entire region. Ruby continued her nursing work well into her 60s, though she finally had to admit that climbing onto horses and making long rides to distant ranches was getting harder. She transitioned to seeing patients at the ranch, and people came to her from miles around, knowing that Ruby Winters was someone they could trust with their health and their lives. She and Riley grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing but their love as strong as ever. They sat on their porch in the evenings and watched their grandchildren play in the yard, marveling at how their family had grown. James married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and they had 4 children. Sarah married a doctor she met in Denver, and they had 3 children. Michael married a rancher's daughter, and they had 2 children. The Winters family gatherings were loud, chaotic affairs that filled the house to bursting. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Riley surprised Ruby by taking her back to the meadow where he had proposed. It was harder to get there now, their joints not as flexible as they once were, but they managed. They sat on a blanket in the flowers, just as they had all those years ago. "I have loved every single day with you," Riley said, taking her wrinkled hand in his. "Even the hard days, even the days when everything seemed to go wrong, because I was with you, and that made it all worthwhile." Ruby leaned her head on his shoulder. "You are the best decision I ever made," she said. "When I was standing on that street, so exhausted I could not see straight, I had no idea that falling was actually the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. Because you caught me, and you have been catching me ever since." "Let me care for you now," Riley said softly, echoing the words he had spoken 3 decades earlier. "For whatever time we have left, always," Ruby whispered. "Always, yes." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and gold. Then Riley helped Ruby to her feet, and they walked back to the wagon together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever years remained to them the same way they had faced everything else together. Ruby lived to be 78 years old, Riley to 80. They died within 6 months of each other, having spent 50 years building a life and a love that became legendary in the Colorado Territory. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down to James, and then to his children, a legacy of hard work and devotion. But more than the land or the cattle, or even the family they had built, what endured was the story of how they met. How an exhausted nurse had been caught by a cowboy when she fell, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into one of the great loves of the American West. It became a story that grandchildren told their grandchildren, a reminder that sometimes falling was exactly what you needed to do in order to find where you truly belonged. The house still stood on the land Riley had bought all those years ago, and if you sat on the porch on a quiet evening, you could almost hear the echo of their voices, the sound of their laughter. The love they had built together had seeped into the very boards and beams, making it more than just a house. It was a home, filled with the memory of two people who had taken a chance on each other and created something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And every spring, wildflowers still bloomed in the meadow where Riley had proposed, a living testament to the moment when everything changed, when a cowboy and a nurse promised to face the world together, no matter what challenges came their way.